Welcome to this Bookshare presentation offered by the Kansas School for the Blind. This topic is divided into two sessions. The purpose of this presentation is to help you understand what Bookshare is and how it can assist your teachers in supporting students who need accessible instructional materials. This session will introduce Bookshare, and we're also going to provide you foundational information, outline the eligibility criteria, and describe the formats and tools used to access Bookshare files. If you've never heard of this organization, let me introduce you to Bookshare. Bookshare is a digital library of over 650,000 titles, and it's growing. It is free for eligible students of any age and free to schools through funding from OSEP, the Office of Special Education Programs in the Department of Education. Eligible individuals who are not students, meaning they are not enrolled in an educational institution, or the non-educational organizations who serve eligible individuals can join Bookshare. They just need to pay a low-cost annual membership fee. How can Bookshare digitize all of these books without violating copyright? Bookshare can provide digital materials under a copyright exception added in 1996 called the Chafee Amendment. In general, this amendment allows authorized organizations to reproduce and distribute copies of published, non-dramatic literary works in specialized formats for individuals with disabilities. For some background information related to how Bookshare aligns to IDEA, I want to discuss a little bit about NIMAC and NIMAS before we move on. When IDEA was reauthorized in 2004, there was a provision added to establish NIMAC, which is the National Instructional Materials Accessibility Center. NIMAC established the National Instructional Materials Accessibility Standards, or we call for short NIMAS. These standards are used by publishers to produce files in a specific way so that accessible formats can be produced. NIMAC is the national repository for NIMAS source files of K-12 textbooks and related print instructional materials. The duties and purpose of NIMAC is basically to receive and maintain a catalog of print instructional materials prepared using the defined NIMAS standards, and to provide access to those materials, including textbooks in accessible formats, free of charge to individuals with print disabilities in both the elementary and secondary schools. They are also charged with developing procedures to protect against copyright infringement. You might notice that Bookshare puts copyright information at the beginning of every book that they produce. This is one way to meet the copyright requirements. On the next few slides, I want to define the underlined terms seen on the slide. They are print instructional materials, accessible formats, and persons with print disabilities. IDEA defined print instructional materials in the following way: print textbooks and related materials that are written and published primarily for use in elementary and secondary school instruction and are required by a state or local education agency for use by students in the classroom. This often includes workbooks and other supplemental materials packaged with the textbook by the publisher. IDEA defines persons with the print disability as individuals who may qualify in accordance with the federal legislation called the Act to Provide Books in Specialized Formats for the Blind and Physically Handicapped. This act was initially approved in March of 1931 and has been revised periodically over the years. Initially, this act established funding for the National Library Services to provide books in Braille or sound recordings for adults who are blind, but it has expanded over the years to provide accessible text for those with visual impairments, physical disabilities, and those with learning disabilities. A print disability is not a new IDEA disability classification, but refers to the ability of a student to interact with the printed materials found within the classroom. The IEP team may consider this when the student has a disability of blindness, visual impairment, learning disability, or other physical disability. Sometimes IEP teams will ask whether or not the student can gain information accurately and efficiently from standard printed materials. If not, the educational team may ask an additional question: does the student need accessible instructional materials defined as specialized formats used by a student with a print disability to gain information and access to the instructional materials. Specialized formats are specifically described as Braille, large print, digital text, or audio. Before we move on, we can describe the formats in a little more detail. Braille is a tactile symbol of reading and writing, made up of raised dots, 6 of them, to create letters, numbers, and punctuation marks. Braille can be embossed, meaning printed, or produced electronically so that the reader can access raised Braille dots under the student's fingers on a display. It's amazing. Another format is large print, which is generally defined as print that is larger than the print size commonly used by the general population. But what exactly does that mean? Well, according to the American Printing House for the Blind, standard print is 12-point font. 14 to 16-point font is considered enlarged print, and 18-point font or larger is considered large print. An 18-point font or larger with additional formatting changes is considered enhanced print. Enhancement examples can be highlighting, adding contrast, or increasing spacing between letters. Just a few examples. One of the benefits of accessible digital text formats is that the student can control the size of the print to meet his or her needs for each type of reading task they encounter throughout their day. Audio format, which is basically content in a format in a way that the student can listen to the text either by human or computer voice. Digital text is electronic content that is delivered on a computer, allowing the student to change the size, the contrast, etc. of the material that they are reading. Keep in mind that just because a document is in digital format does not guarantee that it will be accessible for the student with a print disability. Specific formatting is typically needed to ensure accessibility. For students with visual impairments, decisions about the appropriate use of and need for accessible instructional materials is part of their functional vision assessment or learning media assessment. There is guidance on when the accessible formats need to be provided to students with disabilities. IDEA states that in order to meet its responsibilities, the school district needs to ensure that children with disabilities who need instructional materials in accessible formats are provided those in a timely manner. The state education agency must ensure that public agencies take reasonable steps to provide instructional materials in accessible formats to children with disabilities who need those accessible materials at the same time as other children receive their instructional materials. In addition, IDEA requires that the state education agency establish a definition of timely manner. Kansas has defined timely manner as the responsible public agency has taken all reasonable steps to ensure that needed instructional materials, including instructional materials that cannot be produced from NIMAS source files, are provided in accessible formats for blind or other children with print disabilities at the same time as non-disabled students receive their instructional materials. The definition for timely manner applies to all children with disabilities that need instructional materials provided in an accessible format, regardless of whether or not a student is eligible for NIMAC. This requirement can be challenging for the local school district, but Bookshare is one of the options available to help schools address the needs for accessible instructional materials. Bookshare does provide benefits for students with print disabilities who use this service as well. One of the benefits is that students can read using their preferred method or format. At this time, Bookshare provides books in 5 different formats: a web reader, DAISY format, EPUB, MP3, and digitized Braille. Students can also personalize how they access the digital books. The Bookshare library is compatible with many devices, such as computers, Chromebooks, tablets, smartphones, and other assistive technology that often contain built-in features that a student can use when reading. Students can access books in a large selection of categories or topics to support learning in all of their subject areas in school. For example, there are literary categories in fiction, nonfiction, children's books, biographies, reference materials, poetry, education, foreign language study, and textbooks. And finally, Bookshare is a free resource for schools to provide accessible instructional materials as described in IDEA for eligible students. Now that we've introduced Bookshare, we can look more closely at the organization related to eligibility, categories of books, and tool options. Bookshare eligibility categories are defined by copyright law and not education law, so even though an individual meets eligibility criteria under IDEA, we need to understand that they may not qualify for Bookshare. Bookshare lists 3 specific disabilities: learning disability, visual impairment, and physical disability. Bookshare requires a competent expert or authority to sign and confirm that the individual has one of the qualifying conditions. If a student is already a member of the National Library Service, that membership can be used as proof of disability. In our state, this is the Talking Book Library. Let's take a minute to look more closely at the eligibility criteria and a description of who can be the expert or competent authority. Bookshare defines a learning disability as one that significantly interferes with reading, or is a disorder in the basic process involved in understanding or in using written language that results in the imperfect ability to read. Dyslexia is one example. A competent authority to document proof of a learning disability can be a neurologist, a psychiatrist, a learning disability specialist, special education teacher, school psychologist, or a clinical psychologist with a background in learning disabilities. Bookshare describes a visual impairment in a couple of ways. It states that if an individual is legally blind, that they're eligible. The definition of legal blindness is 20/200 or worse in the better eye with correction, or a visual field of less than 20 degrees. However, legal blindness alone is not the only way to qualify as an individual with a visual impairment. If the individual has a functional vision assessment that indicates a significant problem accessing text visually, they may also qualify. A competent authority to document proof of a visual impairment can be a family doctor, ophthalmologist, optometrist, teacher of students with visual impairments, or a special education teacher. If using an FVA, functional vision assessment, I would suggest getting the proof of disability from the teacher of students with visual impairments. A physical disability is defined as a disability that hinders the student's ability to hold a book, turn pages, move his or her head, or that they don't have the physical stamina to work with or otherwise physically manage the activity of reading a book. A competent authority to document proof of physical disability can be a family doctor, a medical professional, physical therapist, a resource specialist, or a special education teacher. As described earlier, Bookshare eligibility categories are defined by copyright law and not education law. So even though an individual meets the eligibility criteria under IDEA, they may not necessarily qualify for Bookshare. The Bookshare website has a list of categories that typically do not qualify, and that includes individuals with autism, intellectual disabilities, ADHD, hearing loss, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, or English language learners. This list does not necessarily mean that students with these disabilities cannot have a membership in Bookshare, because it is possible for an individual to have more than one disability. There's no need to identify the primary disability and use that category to determine if an individual qualifies. If the individual has one of the qualifying disabilities verified by an expert, they can register with Bookshare. For example, a student who is deaf and has a visual impairment, or a student with a developmental delay but also has a physical disability, or an English language learner who also has a learning disability. Let's look at what books students can obtain through the digital library. There are 3 broad categories of books available. They are the public domain materials, of course, copyrighted materials, or NIMAC files. Public domain books are not under copyright and can be freely distributed and downloaded by anyone, even if not a member of Bookshare. Books under copyright can be downloaded for members by a sponsor or by the student if they have their own individual membership. Only educators at K-12 schools may download NIMAC textbooks. This means students or their parents can't download the NIMAC files. That has to be done at the school level. For many reasons that can be legal or technical, there are some materials that just can't be converted. For example, the copyright law specifically states that dramatic works can't be converted unless they are in the public domain. For technical reasons, Bookshare may not convert mainly image-based materials because there would be very little information to put into a digital text document, such as an atlas or a graphic novel. There is a full listing on their website of items they do not convert into a digital text file at this time. However, that could change in the future. Bookshare materials are provided in 5 different formats, which I'll briefly describe. There's a Bookshare web reader and its customized reading tool that allows the individual to read Bookshare books using the internet browser, which basically means you need the internet in order to use it. To access these books, students would log into their account, browse for their desired title, and then select the Read Now button. And there's no need to download book files. EPUB are text files, and they can be used with a variety of reading applications, including iBooks. DAISY format, Digital Accessible Information Systems, is a digital format using a text file that is compatible with assistive technology tools. Some of these tools include screen readers, DAISY players, Braille note takers, scan and read software such as Read Out Loud, Kurzweil, or Win. Using DAISY digital text format, an individual can see and hear, manipulate, highlight, enlarge, and navigate the text. DAISY audio files are MP3 files created with Bookshare's text-to-speech engine and works with DAISY audio compatible players such as a Victor Reader Trek and Read2Go. BRF, or Braille Refreshable Format, is digital Braille for use with refreshable Braille displays and Braille embossers. MP3 is an audio format only created with a text-to-speech engine. Any device that supports MP3 playback is compatible. The list of tools compatible with Bookshare is too large to list here. However, there are a few ways to find this information. On the Bookshare website, there is a reading tool wizard, which can help. You first identify your preferred reading device, such as a computer, a laptop, a mobile, tablet, or smartphone, or a specific assistive technology tool. Then you use the wizard to guide you through the options available based on your preferred devices. My favorite section on the Bookshare website lists specific tool or device features and its compatibility with Bookshare. For example, it will list if the tool supports images, word highlighting, offline reading, or if it's integrated with Bookshare. An example of integration is that an app on the iPad includes a link directly to Bookshare files. Keep in mind that not all of the tools listed are appropriate for every student. Even though we dream of it, there isn't a one-size-fits-all device. For example, there are tools designed for students with learning disabilities, but will not address the unique needs of someone who is blind. Bookshare does have a section on their website called Member Preferred Tools. It lists preferred options by members based on the category of disability. This is really not an exhaustive list, but it is a good place to review examples of reading options. If you want additional information, there are links on this slide provided for your review. The first one is for links to video clips and how-to guides on the Bookshare website. If you want to learn more about NIMAC and NIMAS, there are links that will take you to those websites. A good resource about accessible instructional materials is the website with the same name. A nice article that describes accessibility issues due to the ever-increasing digital demands in the classroom is listed. The last item is a link to the Talking Book Library in case you would like to know more about that service. Thank you for listening to Part 1, The Foundations of Bookshare. Part 2 will cover the topics of searching for, downloading, and using Bookshare files. For additional information, please contact the Kansas School for the Blind Field Services Office or the Field Service Specialist in your region.